So, what does it really mean to be smart? For the longest time, the answer felt pretty simple, right? It was just a number, your IQ score. But what if that one number only tells a tiny, tiny fraction of the whole story? Well, today, we're going to dive into a much bigger, way more fascinating picture of human intelligence, one that goes way beyond test scores to include everything from street smarts to, yeah, even our feelings.
So, how are we going to tackle such a huge topic? We've got a great little roadmap for our journey. We'll kick things off with that traditional view of smarts and see where it kind of falls short. Then we'll get into practical intelligence, the idea that we have multiple different kinds of smarts, and how our intelligence actually changes over our lifetime. We'll even look at the intelligence of our emotions before we tie it all together with a really powerful idea about what intelligence is ultimately for.
All right, let's dive right in with the idea of smart that most of us probably grew up with. For the better part of a century, if you asked what it meant to be intelligent, the answer was honestly pretty simple. It all came down to a single number, your IQ.
Yeah, for most of the 20th century, intelligence was basically defined as whatever an IQ test measured. And these tests, they focus on a very specific set of skills, mostly your verbal and linguistic abilities and your logical mathematical thinking. I mean, think about it. Your score on one of these tests could literally shape your future, right? It could determine whether you got into a good school and was seen as the final word on your mental horsepower.
But here's the thing, and it's a big thing. The real world doesn't look anything like a standardized test. The neat, clean, well-defined problems on a test are a world away from the messy, complicated, unpredictable reality we all have to navigate every single day. And that has led a lot of psychologists to ask, wait a minute, are these tests missing a huge piece of the puzzle?
And this is where that mismatch just becomes crystal clear. On a test, the problem is handed to you on a silver platter. It's clearly defined, you get all the info you need, and there's one and only one right answer. But in the real world, come on, a lot of the time, the hardest part is just figuring out what the problem even is. Real-world problems are ambiguous, they're wrapped up in all sorts of context, and there's almost never a single perfect solution.
And that brings us to a really crucial point. If IQ tests are only measuring one narrow slice of our thinking, what else is out there? Well, this leads us into the amazing world of practical intelligence. Psychologists have known about this difference for a long time. You've probably heard it called book smarts versus street smarts. Book smarts, that's your ability to ace a test. Street smarts, that's your ability to, I don't know, talk your way out of a tricky situation or figure out how to assemble a piece of furniture without the instructions. And here's the fascinating part. Being good at one doesn't at all mean you'll be good at the other. There was this incredible study done with the Yupik communities in Alaska that just brings this to life. Researchers went in and measured two things in teenagers: their academic intelligence, using standard tests, and their practical intelligence, which was all about everyday knowledge essential to their culture. Stuff like how to predict the weather or how to navigate across the tundra. The results? They were stunning. That practical, everyday knowledge was a much better predictor of who the communities saw as capable and successful than the academic test scores were.
So, what is this street smarts, really? Well, the psychologist Robert Sternberg calls it practical intelligence, and he says we use it in three main ways. First, there's adaptation. That's when you change yourself to fit in, like learning new software for a job. Then there's shaping. That's when you change the environment to fit you, like reorganizing your team's workflow to be more efficient. And finally, there's selection. That's when you realize the situation is just not working and you find a completely new one, like leaving a dead-end job for a career with a future.
Okay, so this idea of different kinds of smarts, it opens up an even bigger question. What if intelligence isn't just a pair of things, like academic and practical? What if it's more like a whole symphony of different abilities? Well, that is the core idea behind Howard Gardner's famous theory. Back in 1983, Howard Gardner basically threw a grenade into the whole concept of a single, measurable IQ. He argued that human intelligence isn't one general thing at all, but a whole set of several distinct intelligences. He believed every single one of us has a unique blend of these different abilities, and that our school system was totally failing us by only focusing on one or two. And just look at the full spectrum he came up with. Of course, you've got the ones we're used to, like logical mathematical and verbal linguistic. But then, look at this. You've got bodily kinesthetic intelligence, the genius of an athlete or a dancer; musical intelligence, the mind of a composer; visual spatial, the way an architect sees the world. Then there are the personal ones, interpersonal for understanding other people and intrapersonal for understanding yourself. It even includes naturalistic intelligence, understanding the living world, and existential intelligence, our ability to tackle the big questions of life. Suddenly, being smart looks a whole lot bigger, doesn't it? And here's where it gets really wild. When researchers actually asked people which of these intelligences they felt they were strongest in, the results totally flipped the script on what our schools value. A 2008 study found that the two most common preferences were bodily kinesthetic and musical intelligence. And the ones our schools hammer on about, verbal and visual, they were among the least common. That suggests a huge disconnect between how we're naturally wired and what we're told is important. So we've got all these different types of intelligence, but are they set in stone? Are we just stuck with the hand we're dealt at birth? Absolutely not. Our cognitive abilities are dynamic, and they change in really interesting ways as we get older. Okay, so to get this, psychologists talk about two main types. First, you have fluid intelligence. Think of this as your brain's raw processing power, your ability to think on your feet, solve new problems, and see patterns without any prior experience. It's fast and flexible. Then you have crystallized intelligence. This is like your personal library of knowledge. It's everything you've learned, all the facts and skills you've picked up over the years. Now, that fluid intelligence, our ability to think quickly and flexibly, that tends to be at its absolute sharpest when we're younger. Research suggests it peaks in our early adulthood, and then, it begins a slow, gradual decline, often starting around age 30 or 40. It's our raw problem-solving horsepower. But, and this is the wonderful part, while that quickness might slow down a bit, our crystallized intelligence, our wisdom, it just keeps growing. It can continue to get bigger and better well into our 60s, 70s, and even beyond. So what we might lose in sheer speed, we more than make up for in depth, perspective, and, well, wisdom. We've talked about intelligence in our heads, intelligence in our actions, but there is one more massive piece of this puzzle we absolutely have to talk about. And it might be the most important one for getting by in the world: the intelligence of our feelings. Emotional intelligence, or EI, is pretty straightforward. It's the ability to understand and manage emotions, both your own and those of the people around you. Now, this isn't about being overly sensitive or touchy-feely. It's a real cognitive skill, a fundamental ability for navigating our incredibly complex social world. And the payoff for having high EI is just huge. It's tangible. Research shows that people who have a good handle on their emotional world tend to be more optimistic, they have better impulse control, they build warmer relationships, and get this, they are more resilient. They are more persistent when things get frustrating. It's an intelligence that doesn't just make you smarter with people, it directly leads to a richer, more successful life. Okay, so we've taken this idea of intelligence apart and looked at all these different pieces: practical, multiple, fluid, crystallized, emotional. Let's put it all back together now to answer one last really big question. What is all of this for? What's the point? And this brings us to this amazing unifying idea from Robert Sternberg: adaptive intelligence. It basically takes that idea of practical intelligence, adapting, shaping, and selecting our environments, but it adds a crucial ethical dimension. It argues that the true purpose of all our intelligence isn't just about getting ahead ourselves. The ultimate goal is to use our full toolkit of abilities to tackle real-world problems and contribute to the common good. I'm just going to let this quote sink in for a second. Adaptive intelligence is about creating a future not only for ourselves, but also for future generations. This completely reframes intelligence. It's not just a personal trophy anymore. It's a collective responsibility. It's not about how smart you are, but about how you use that intelligence to make things better. So we've seen that being smart is not about a single number. It's a rich, diverse toolkit of abilities that every single one of us has in our own unique combination. It's practical, it's creative, it's emotional, and it evolves throughout our lives. Which means the real question isn't how smart are you? The real question is, you have this incredible toolkit of intelligences. How are you going to use them?